Hey folks, Lucero here again with another video on a rundown of yet another patch that went live on the Bazaar just 2 days ago. Um, Funnily enough, in my last patch notes video I did, I mentioned that what precipitated me finally sitting down and knocking the video out was that I got booted from the game and couldn't log back on. Like I was disconnected. Normally you can start right back up, and I was unable to. And I was out searching the web to see if there was another patch or a hotfix or anything, and nothing was said on the Discord about it, nothing on Twitter, etc. It wasn't announced publicly. But as it turns out, there was indeed another hotfix patch going in. Just made changes to a couple of items, a handful of items. There's 5 or 6 changes, and with one exception, these I have run through. Once again, I'm in the game. I'm like, oh, that's different. So I go and look, and sure enough, uh, there is another round of nerfs. They are all but one of them is definitely a nerf. Some of them quite big. Um, so yeah, without further ado, let's jump into these and look at what changed and talk about what kind of impact it's likely to have. So first up, we have Calcinator here, and so I mean you can see these are Mac items, and as you look on the screen, there's a bunch of them. Before we even scroll, it's Mac items. So yeah, that's right, more nerfs to Mac, uh, and not small ones. The Calcinator and the Retort both got hit in the same fashion. As you can see here, their burn is reduced by 2 across the board, and poison by 2 across the board. And also on the Philosopher Stone, its regen has been halved at each level of scaling. That's a huge hit to the stone, even more so than the Calcinator or the Retort. In addition to that, you now have to spend 3 gold to get that chunk of lead they give you at the start of the day. It's no longer free. So this is a big hit to max economics. In another video, I think I mentioned that I've had way more gold as Mac than I ever did as Pygmalien. And of course, Pygmalien is the economic hero. So it's weird that Mac would be better at making gold than Pig, right? So that's probably why this change has been made. Um, because Pig's just been kind of weak in that regard lately, and he's not supposed to be. So you have to spend 3 gold. Consequently, the gold that you get from the chunk of lead now also sells for 6 as opposed to 5. So it's like kind of scaled to match the 3 gold there. That goes for both the Calcinator and the Retort. And like I said, the stone's regen scaling was hit even harder. It's been halved. I did talk about I had a run, and I will highlight this run on the other side of the cards there down at the bottom. I had a run where I had 1132 regen by the end of a match. The Philosopher's Stone was a factor. My Philosopher's Stone had like 50 regen on it every 5 seconds, I think it is. Yep, 5 seconds. So, uh, that's just huge changes to those 3 items. I will say that I actually just had a run today where I used Calcinator in a burn build, and I still was able to get my Calcinator up to like 46 burn. However, that build was only good enough for 8 wins. So, maybe if I'd had that extra, oh geez, 20 burn, which is also like I had a fiery fire claw. So that thing had like 250. It would have had an additional, it would have been 260, 270 if the Calcinator hadn't been nerfed. So uh, still strong, but nowhere near as strong. So yeah, this is definitely, it's going to impact max economics. It's going to impact his burn builds, his poison builds, his regen builds, those builds that take advantage of both poison and regen due to like the Quill and Ink and the reagent. It's a bushel looking thing. I can't think of the name right now, but it scales poison with regen. All those things are going to be less powerful now. This takes us to the smelling salts. I mentioned my 1100 regen run. That video, like that build, was enabled by smelling salts prior to this change. I managed to pick up 2 smelling salts in that build. Once again, we'll highlight that video. And I had an apothecary. So I've got apothecary, which is charged anytime you slow, poison burn, etc. Smelling salts beside of it, and then another smelling salts beside a vat of acid. And of course, vat of acid is what ends up doing like the damage, but all of the slow that I was doing was charging the apothecary, which was just racking up this regen that made me basically invincible. That build is now going to be a lot less powerful because of this change. The smelling salts used to work whenever you slow, it would haste the item to the left. They have changed that to whenever this or an adjacent item slows, haste the item to the left. Now, that's huge because that means skills will no longer impact it, which they would previously. You know, you could get a skill like Rust off of the Scrapper that at the start of the fight you slow an item or whatever. I don't know the exact wording, but that's no longer going to trigger a haste off of the smelling salts. It's a huge adjustment. I will say the Bazaar loves its like placement skills and you know, it's really big on having your items in the most optimal layout. So in that sense, like it kind of makes sense they would do this, and it's clearly to tone down the power level of some of the interactions that are possible. But it's going to make it much harder to use, nowhere near as beneficial, and I'm not sure if it's as regular of an inclusion in some builds as it was prior. All of its enchants, well, not all of them, but most of its enchants were changed as well. That, you know, it's only an adjacent item. Whereas, once again, if a skill was triggering it, or an amber, or a potion, you know, they would all trigger that effect. So now all of its enchantments are going to be a lot less strong as well. Just a pretty big hit to some Mac items here. We got 4 Mac items. Taking a knock. Then we'll go down here to Pygmalien. We've got the money tree. Cooldown 4 seconds. Heal equal to this item's value. When you level up, get a spare change. When you sell a spare change, this gains 2, 3, 4, and 5 value at various levels. They just changed this the other day. I'd have to go back and refer back to what they had changed. But so it looks like they've increased the spare change value that it gains. And so it did previously have a cooldown reduction for its value. They have removed that completely. I imagine there was probably some play testing that showed, you know, you could imagine if you scale this thing's value like crazy, it's going to end up being a 1-second cast. And a 1-second cast for like 300 heal is probably too strong. So that's been removed. You can still scale it to where it's really powerful, but it's going to take you 4 seconds. And of course, you might be able to charge it or haste it through other means, but this cooldown reduction was apparently too overpowered. It has been removed. That's a pretty big nerf to this item that they literally just changed 2 days prior. So, yeah. Nerf to Money Tree right after they buffed it. Vanessa's Lockbox we have here. This item adds value, gains value as you win a fight, and your weapons have damage equal to that value. So this used to be a static 2. This is the only buff, by the way. Vanessa's item, this lockbox, was buffed. Used to have a static 2 value when you win a fight. Now that scales with your level 3, 6, and 9. It's available at silver. That's the only buff here. Flurry of blows, the skill, even this is a nerf. The first 4 to 8 times you use a weapon each fight, charge 1 item 1 second. That means it could have, in the past, it could charge itself. That has been changed to another item. So now the weapon cannot charge itself. It will only charge something else. So that's yet another nerf. That's it. But it's really, the main thing is like, they keep hitting Mac. And, you know, it must be the case that he's just still too strong. I felt after some of the recent changes that his power level was kind of getting reduced in an effective way. This, you know, part of this I do think is the economic angle. But for sure, the scaling on these items is nowhere near as strong now. And, oh, I do want to mention, however, let's go back to the smelling salts still. Like, the build that I ran, I actually had a heavy apothecary. So my build, if you could manage to pull it off, it would still work because it literally was adjacent to the item. And then you could always, like, if you have a potion, you could put it on the right, and maybe it has a slow as well, so you're triggering a little extra there, so it's kind of like multicast 3 or something. But yeah, you're not going to be able to have like multicast 7 on it anymore. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. If you like the gameplay vids, the commentary, please give a like and subscribe. Check me out on Twitch at LuceroHS. I'm not a full-time streamer, so you're not going to find me on there all the time, but I'd appreciate a follow. Yeah, thanks for watching, and catch you next time.